Okay, start for.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh from International Institute of Islamic Thought, ISTEC at IIUM. I'm very glad to welcome all of you here and our panelists this afternoon. It is our seminar, our webinar today is in the celebration of the independence of Malaysia of 64 years of Merdeka. And the topic is Sejahtera and Merdeka, liberating minds, strengthening hearts, and sustaining development. Before we start our meeting, our panel discussion today, I want to give a little bit of a historical background to Merdeka, or independence, which has got to do with the year 1945. Our students should remember this year, 1945. I was, as a student of political science, was always taught about the world after 1945, because the 1945 marks the end of the Second World War. And the Second World War went on for 7 years, from 1939 to 1945. And it was basically a European war, or a Western war, in which the European countries were fighting each other, including America. And Japan joined in later. And in that war, 75 million people died. I was just looking at the record today about the pandemic. In the pandemic of COVID-19, so far 4.6 million people have died, but because of disease. But in the 75 million who died included Europeans, Asians, and Africans, because the Europeans had colonized the Asian and African countries. And the cause of their death was genocide, massacres, mass bombings, as we saw in Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, disease, and starvation. And this had exhausted the European colonizers, that they finally had to give up their colonies. So UK, France, Netherlands, Italy, America, which had colonized the Asian and African countries from 1850 onwards, so were no more able to continue with their colonization. On the other hand, there was the rise of the nationalist movements, or independence movements, demanding freedom and independence from colonial administration. And that demand came in the name of Merdeka, Hurriya, Uhuru, and other terms which are local words. And so here, being in the Malay world, we use the word Merdeka of Southeast Asia. So the Second World War, the end of the Second World War also left a legacy. The European countries, which were the colonizers, which were departing, they wanted the new countries which had emerged, or which they had demarcated, to be following the European model of governance, financial administration, political administration, on the condition that Western models would be continued. Western economies models would be continued. And they left the Asian and African countries with the ideologies of nationalism, secularism, communism, all of which were actually European inventions imposed on Asians and African countries. Now, when we talk about Merdeka, Hurriya, Uhuru in Swahili for the Africans, East African, we saw the rise of nationalist leaders. Actually, these nationalist leaders were the products of the Western universities, Western educational administration, or they were mostly trained in the West. And you're familiar with the names of people like Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah, Nkrumah of Ghana, Nasser of Egypt, Ahmad bin Bella, who was deposed by Boumediene in Tunisia, in Algeria, and Habib Bourguiba of Tunisia. I'm mentioning Habib Bourguiba here importantly because he was against the fasting during the month of Ramadan. And he used to come on TV and drink the orange juice, because he was following the European model and saying that the month of Ramadan makes people lazy and they don't work hard. So it affects economic development. And here in Southeast Asia, we had the leaders like Tunku Abdul Rahman, who was the leader of the independence movement in Malaysia, Sukarno, though he was not educated in the West, was the leader of Indonesia. And now, interestingly, he had 9 wives, and he was overthrown afterwards by Suharto, who was in power for 32 years. So independence, what does independence mean? What does Merdeka mean? And with this question comes with a question the question which we are discussing today about Insan Sejahtera. And Insan Sejahtera is the Malay word for which we are defining today as liberated minds, strengthening and sustainable development. Now, in the idea of Insan Sejahtera in the context of IIUM was introduced by His Honorable President Rector Tan Sri Professor Emeritus Zulkifl when he became the rector of IIUM. And he emphasized that Insan Sejahtera is to achieve peace of mind, happiness, and which are essential to human beings. And he coined the word spices. Sejahtera means spiritual development, psychological development, intellectual, cognitive, cultural, ethical, emotional, ecological, economic, and societal dimensions. So Insan Sejahtera, or well-being, welfare of the society, it has many aspects, and it has to be a balanced development to achieve an overall state of development and sustainable development over generations, not only at present, but going further down the line. The concept of Insan Sejahtera sounds very strange. If we look at the term, if we hear the term for the first time, and we think that it has no Islamic or Muslim Islamic implications or connections. So Professor Kamal Hassan, the former rector of IIUM, has written 2 articles. In one article, which is titled "The Spiritual Core of Insan Sejahtera Personality," he says, and I'm quoting him, he says, I have argued that the most suitable equivalent of Sejahtera in the idiom of the Quran is al-falah, true success, holistic well-being, happiness, bliss, and prosperity in this dunya and akhirah, in this world and the hereafter. The antonym of Insan Sejahtera or of falah or muflihun, as Allah says in the Quran, humul muflihun, is the people who are in the state of khusran, or true loss, failure, diminution, suffering in the world, punishment in the hereafter, which is implied in the Surah Al-Asr of the Quran. So Insan Sejahtera means the people who are muflihun or muflihun in plural, a mufli person. Who has overcome, or he who is not in a state of khusran or khasara. He also says, recently Professor Kamal Hassan has come up with another article which is very relevant, again in the context of Merdeka, the Malay concept of Sejahtera from an Islamic perspective, in which he argues, and this article is connected with the state of COVID pandemic, and he says we are all struggling starving for Sejahtera in the era of COVID-19 pandemic. So we have to re-examine as Muslim scholars, intellectuals, students, and staff, as we want to develop holistically an idea of sustainable development from the worldview of Tawheed. So the challenge before the academy, and we are all in the academic institution, is how to achieve sustainable development through what is known as humanizing of education, which is the present plan of IIUM, and we are embarking on this project of SDG goals. In our context, the SDG goal, or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, especially number 16, is related to us, and it is related with the idea of peace, justice, and building of strong institutions. But IIUM has gone furthermore. when we are talking about Insan Sejahtera and Merdeka by proposing, and we are intending to propose, the SDG number 18, which is led by, which has been formed. There's a task force for SDG 18, which is led by none other than our Dean of ISTEC, Professor Abdul Aziz Barghouth, and this SDG 18 is known as spirituality. So with this introduction, I welcome you all here and the panelists, and we will go in the order as on the poster, excuse me, and discuss this topic this morning. So our first speaker is no other than Professor Professor Usman Bakar, who Usman Bakar, who has a doctorate in Islamic philosophy from Temple University, Philadelphia. We have known each other for more than 40 years, and he's currently the holder of the Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at ISTEC IIUM. His biography is that he is the Emeritus Professor in Philosophy of Science at University of Malaya and a Distinguished Professor and Director of the Sultan Umar Ali Saifuddin Center of Islamic Studies in University of Brunei. Before that, he was the Malaysia Chair of Islam at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown University. He is also the former Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic and Research at the University of Malaya. He is author very well known in the field of history and philosophy of science, worldly renowned, very well known for writing 40 books and more than 300 articles on the various aspects of Islamic thought and civilization. To mention just a few of his works, which are very well known, are Classification of Knowledge in Islam, which you find referenced, which I find referenced, and I believe all of you find referenced again and again in various articles and books on Islamization of knowledge or the knowledge in Islam. And the other book is Tawheed and Science. His latest book is Al-Farabi, Life, Works and Significance. And latest in 2020 is Colonialism in Malay Archipelago. He has been named Archipelago. And another book which I forgot to mention is Islam and Confucianism. He has been named among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world since 2009. He was made Dato in 1994 and by the Sultan of Pahang, and Dato by the King in 2000. So Professor Usman Bakar, the microphone is yours, please. Bismillah.
Thank you, Professor Imtiaz, for the kind introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wa mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat petang. My fellow panelists, Professor Abdul Aziz Barghouth, the Dean of ISTEC, Professor Dawood, and Professor Walid, and I see Dr. Nick Saifu, the Deputy Dean, and all listeners. Thank you very much for being able to attend this webinar. I've asked Dr. Professor Imtiaz how long should I speak. He told me 15 minutes. So I'll try to say a few words in those 15 minutes. I will try to remain faithful to the topic of the seminar, which is Insan Sejahtera and Merdeka, and the subtitle Liberating the Minds, Strengthening the Hearts, and Sustaining Development. Well, the topic is very, very broad. So given the time given, I think I'll just try to pick up, try to select a few aspects of the topic and try to highlight on them. But it's a very beautiful topic. First of all, because this program is held on the occasion of the Merdeka celebration. Malaysians have just celebrated the 64th birthday of of the country. Its birthday, the National Day or the Merdeka Day. So only 64 years old, which is short in the life of a nation. So I think a few days ago I was speaking elsewhere, also on the occasion of Merdeka. So I said Malaysia or Malaya, because 64 years, Malaya, which obtained independence in 1957, is a young nation. Yeah, it's a young nation. Of course, that doesn't mean that the nationhood experienced by the Malays is only of recent times. No, I think long before the Western colonial powers came to the region, the Malays as a people for the whole region, Nusantara, I mean, they have practiced their own understanding of nationhood, based on the idea of the Sultanate, because the Sultanate was the institution, the political institution in the region. So they know what it means to be, they're really very, very conscious of the meaning of Merdeka, of course, which is Merdeka conveys the broad meaning of freedom and independence. Merdeka is not just independence, but also freedom. In a sense, quite close to the Arabic Hurriya, Merdeka. So something like kebebasan. But the point is, in the Islamic, in the Malay Islamic consciousness of Merdeka, they don't basically the two terms together. Merdeka combines the ideas of freedom and independence. Two words which we can analyze philosophically. We can do a very, very interesting analysis of the two words. Now, of course, since this is held by ISTEC, by IIUN, I think the attempt to link the concept of Insan Sejahtera to Merdeka is very appropriate. It is normally the case when, at a personal level, when we celebrate our birthday. In a sense, we also try to do some muhasabah, the kind of self-critical appraisal of our own personal being. So also in the case of a nation. So it is good on the 64th birthday of Malaysia, and in the case of Malaysia, 58th birthday, which is on the 16th of this month, we take stock of our collective condition, how we are this year, in 2021. Are we better off than last year, or are we worse off than last year, or are we static? These are it is good if citizens of the country try to take appraisal of in an objective and critical way regarding our present condition, of course, minus the pandemic. Now, as I see it, right, I mean, of course, it has been explained by Professor Imtiaz, and I'm sure the fellow panelists will also be saying more about this. The concept of Insan Sejahtera was conceptualized by our present rector, but the concept is a kind of created out of basically a synthesis of ideas that are embraced in 4 dimensions related to university, namely the IIUN vision and mission, and then the national philosophy of education, and then the Maqasid al-Sharia, and the SDGs. the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, if we look carefully at these 4 dimensions, there is overlap. There's an overlapping in the concept, but what emerged, the key idea that emerged out of these 4 dimensions is the quality of our humanness, kemanusiaan in Malay, yeah, the quality of our humanness. So if we every year we try to look at this issue of quality of our humanness. What has 64 years of independence? In what way those years have improved the quality of our humanness, or what is it otherwise? So I think we need to do some soul searching. Now, basically, I think since we are ISTEC IUM is an Islamic institution, of course, our guiding principle is the Islamic conception of man. In other words, the ideas contained in the conception, Islamic conception of man, will guide us in our evaluation. But in the topic given, basically, out of many different dimensions of Insan Sejahtera, 3 characteristics are emphasized. 3 characteristics, namely peace of mind, which is related to liberating the mind. It is important to emphasize that this what we mean is liberating the mind. The essence of liberating the mind is peace of mind. Of course, more than the peace of mind, of course, no, it is a state of our being, but it is important that we are also creative, with a creative mind, a very productive mind. In others, all the different aspects of the concept of the intellect, reason, that's been discussed throughout the centuries in Islam. We have a very, very rich literature on the subject of the intellect, reason in Islamic civilization. That literature be our source, the source of our study, of our research, to inspire us. At a time when many people in the world today have reduced the meaning of intelligence to the lowest level, almost just slightly better than the artificial intelligence which computer technology try to create. I mean, the concept of intelligence must be understood as something much broader. So, in terms of what we need to do, yes, we want to improve the quality of our humanness. One of the elements that must be improved is the conception of mind, the conception of the intellect, of reason. But the resulting characteristic that we seek to achieve is peace of mind, and peace, of course, related to health. But in the case of Islamic literature, can use the word adjective salim, means healthy mind. Al-aqlu as-salim, the healthy mind, and because it is a healthy mind that will result in peace of the mind. Now, the second characteristic of the Insan Sejahtera that is being translated, of course, is the strengthening the heart. In other words, happiness. So this is one of the characteristics of the Insan Sejahtera is happiness. I think the Professor Zul, Tansib Zul, has always, he is very fond of the idea of happiness. He refers to Bhutan, the country, which kind of has a different idea of the national goal, which is not the gross national product, but actually happiness. Now, happiness is concerns the heart. Happiness, the seed of happiness is the heart. Right? So happiness, therefore, pertains to the issues of the heart. And most important of all, the characteristics of this heart is how can we create human being? This Insan Sejahtera, of course, must be the kind of person who is caring, who is compassionate, who is the compassionate caring for others. This is the heart of the human virtue, the heart of the human virtues, of course, and this is a source of happiness. But the state of happiness, referring to the heart, again, the adjective salim also used for the heart. It's not only for the intellect reason, but also for the heart. So this concept of healthy, wholesome, the concept of wholesome, integral, a mind that is integral, that is not compartmentalized into different portions, this kind of fractured entity. No, I think we have the English word collectedness. In other words, we should try to seek collectedness. In other words, we are not fractured by the different kinds of knowledge which we have in the world. Life is being fragmented, and because of this fragmentation, and most people don't have the unifying principle. They don't have the principle to unify the diversity, the fragmentation. I think we Muslims, as a people of Tawheed, we always refer to Tawheed as our guiding principle, to gather all the different elements, to unite them, to integrate them into the larger picture of Islamic spirituality and intellectuality. Now, the other one is sustaining development, which is an aspect also of the Insan Sejahtera. If you look at the 17 SDGs that we have right now, adopted as the United Nations document, there's no reference to the human being as an individual. Basically, it's pertaining more to the idea of collective development, not individual. But then we may infer from those 17 SDGs the concept we call the sustaining power. In other words, the importance of the individual in the pursuit of the goals of the Ummah. Right? The individuals are like cells. See, in the biological cells, the cells of our body. Each cell contributes to the health of the overall body. So the same thing here. And I think it is important. In fact, it's the role of education to make sure that the sustaining power, the sustaining capacity of each individual is maintained. All right. So if an individual cannot sustain his or her say iman, all right, her taqwa, so whatever positive things that have been accumulated over the years, all right, if these are not maintained, then the society as a whole also cannot maintain, cannot sustain. So societal sustainability would, or umatic sustainability would depend on the sustaining power of each individual. And I think the question here is something related to tradition also. Yeah? We cannot sustain if we abolish tradition, if we get rid of tradition, because the positive meaning of tradition is that we try to maintain, to preserve the good things that have been accumulated over the years, over the decades, and so on. So I think individually, the word istiqamah, what I mean as the starting power of every individual, is very, very important. Now let me conclude this. Okay, how do we achieve all this? We know now, of course, Insan Sejahtera is basically that kind of human being that has a state of peace of mind, that is happy, that is not experiencing happiness or state of a healthy heart, all right, and having the kind of the power of istiqamah. Now, how can we achieve this? Well, a simple short answer to this is that we cannot achieve this, or rather, the main way to achieve this is through education in the comprehensive sense, both formal education and informal education. I think we need to return to that tradition in which the home, the school, and the society at large are all contributors to our comprehensive education. And therefore, the human values that are nurtured, that are built, that are prospered in the home, in the family, the schools, and the society at large are in harmony with each other. These are ideals, but at least we must have those ideas, although we realize in practice there are a lot of challenges that we have to face. So basically, that's Professor Moderator, what I need to say regarding the topic. It is a very broad topic, a lot of things that we care about, but just to to begin the discussion for the webinar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Thank you very much, Terima kasih, Professor Usman. Actually, you started off the game like a football game by laying down the principles of Merdeka and Insan Sejahtera. And this is a good way to start with, because you started talking about the importance of human intelligence, peace of mind, and from the Islamic sources, the idea of salim or salam or happiness, and that is rooted in our identity, in our qalb, our heart. And he also talked about the importance of becoming, we have to evaluate what is our state of our humanness from an intellectual dimension, from a personal dimension, and also not only at the national level, but also at the level of the ummah, or the ummatic state of welfare. And the sustaining power of the individual, the role of education from KG to university, the role of the public sphere from street to the state house, and social at the level of society. And you ended up by talking about the importance of istiqamah as an important source for building of Insan Sejahtera, and for also sustaining the Merdeka, the independence which has been achieved for 64 years, and inshallah will continue to guide this nation, Malaysia, and also Malaysia becomes a beacon or as a model for the other Muslim countries. I know very well, wherever I go, people are always looking, other Muslim countries, they're always looking at Malaysia more in the terms of development, its technological development, while in my view, Malaysia is the most highly technologically developed country in the Muslim world. Thank you very much, Professor Usman. Our second speaker this afternoon is Professor Walid Faris Fakhri. He is the ISTEC Deputy Dean for Postgraduate and Responsible Research. Professor Walid Faris is a professor in mechanical engineering in the College of Engineering at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. He is an active researcher. He has published 120 papers, a larger number, in scientific journals, 100 papers in conferences, and he has published 6 textbooks, monographs in the discipline of engineering. Besides his specialization, he's a researcher in higher educational policies and strategies as well. So I welcome Professor Fakhri to this seminar. The microphone is yours, Professor Walid Fakhri Faris.
Thank you very much, Professor Imtiaz, for this.
And need to speak loudly, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Imtiaz, for the introduction, and also greetings to Professor Dr. Osman Bakar and Professor Abdulaziz and all the attendees of this seminar. And for our Malaysian friends, Sejahtera and Merdeka, for all of you. Inshallah, we pray that it will always be prosperous and advancing countries. I will share a kind of a quick presentation for some of the ideas that I want to talk about. And this will be my focus. I will talk about the spirit of Merdeka, actually a spirit of independence in general. It will not be focused on Malaysia as such, but it will be cutting across all the Muslim nations. And we will look into a few ideas here as the time permits. I'm going to look into the spiritual and intellectual independence. I think Professor Imtiaz gave a kind of a background on the issue of independence, but I need just to summarize a few things. We know that the Muslim countries, majority or all of them, were under actually occupation for a long period of time. This started in the 18th century, when there's empires coming up in Europe, the British Empire, French Empire, and Spanish Empire, and many. One of the main issues due to this colonial era, in fact, some of the countries have benefited in the infrastructure, for example, and some of the Muslim countries benefited in some of the legal framework and system. We cannot ignore these things. But one of the drastic issues that happened is the disruption of the intellectual tradition in the Muslim countries. And this is the most important point, in fact, in my opinion. When the colonial powers came to the Muslim countries, there was already traditions, intellectual traditions, there was spiritual traditions, and there was a very clear identity for these countries. But due to the colonial trials, this tradition has been disrupted sharply. The other thing also that we are facing after the independence is identity crisis, which has been created during this era, unfortunately. Plus the abuse of natural resources. And like many people said, they were trying to create indigenous people with the same mindset of the colonizer, which also have been at the disadvantage of these countries up to this moment in some of them. The independence movement was due to many reasons. We are not just focusing on it, but I will just mention a few of them for the general knowledge. It was the conflict among the colonial powers. The empires were fighting each other, so this came at the benefit of the colonies, and then also the creation of a new world order. Second World War, as mentioned by Professor Imtiaz, the rise of nationalism, and one important issue was reviving the awareness of the identity in the Muslim world, which actually many movement and many people have played a key role across the Muslim world into this aspect. Once the decolonization took place, it was not a very happy moment. Yes, it is definitely for many to be independent, but there was a lot of challenges going on. And even some of the Muslim countries are still under these challenges up to this moment. Number one, Western investments remain or leaving, economic dependence on former colonial powers, and also the old Cold War and the new Cold War, old Cold War between the Soviet Union and United States, and the new Cold War, which is taking place between United States, China, and Russia. So these countries have been always under an influence and has been always trying to get to this side or that side, or few of them try to keep neutral, which was very difficult and still very difficult. Internal challenges, there was issues of tribal allegiances in some of these countries. Illiteracy also was in many countries very high. And one of the most important issues, there's no tradition of ongoing political leadership in many of these countries. So the disruption of the political leadership due to colonial era affected the things. Playing on the issue of religious differences and minorities has been also a big problem after the decolonization, and still in many countries. Plus also the issues of territories and many other things, and the establishment of social hierarchy, which came to in some of these countries at the disadvantage. With all of this, we say that decolonization, of course, was a happy moment, but at the same time, it has a price. It has a price. And this price, some of the Muslim countries still paying up till now. But let's focus on the two main quick issues that I want to look into them. Spiritual independence. Spiritual independence. Muslim countries have been always enjoying a diversity in the spiritual tradition. And this diversity in spiritual tradition, we have seen Muslims coexist with Buddhist and Hindu and Christian and Jews for a very long time, for hundreds of years, in fact, after Islam. And there was a kind of interchange of the spiritual traditions. And if we look at the mystical tradition between the Buddhists, between Muslims, the Sufi traditions, and also the Orthodox, especially the Orthodox Christians, we will find a lot of similarity. We find a lot of similarity in the ways, in the classical tradition in this direction, and also the Hindu. So there was an exchange of ideas. Definitely there was an exchange of ideas. And there was an exchange of influences among all these traditions that built, at the end of the day, a common background for the spiritual tradition in this area. With the disruption happened due to colonial power, some of these traditions disappeared, unfortunately. And I think one of the main tasks that we need to look into it is to rediscover these spiritual traditions and to rediscover these common grounds that has been built over hundreds of years. And the most important issue is these spiritual traditions have sustained the society for a very long time, for a peaceful coexistence and productive manner. So the society was progressing, and at the same time, the conflicts are minimum. Definitely, always there is a conflict, but these conflicts were mitigated to the minimum because there is a common background and common things. So we need to look into this. We need to rediscover this. There are some efforts here and there to rediscover these directions, but I think we still need to move more into discovering these spiritual traditions. The other challenge that we need to look at into the spiritual independence is we need to put these traditions into a modern context, We cannot just keep the old things going as it is. So we need to put these modern old traditions in a modern context that can be understood, can be grasped by the new generation who has been exposed and always exposed to many ideas coming from the East and the West. Plus, also, I think putting these traditions in a modern context will benefit the humanity in general, because it has been benefiting the humanities for a long way. And if we look into them again, we try to put them into a modern context, I think this will help in the whole progress worldwide, not only in the Muslim world. And one issue also for this spiritual independence that will help to resolve identity crisis inherited in many countries from colonial time. Because no country can move forward as long as there is an identity crisis in the country. What made the heritage of Islam, for example, during the past 1500 years going on in a kind of a proper manner was there was no identity crisis. There was no identity crisis. Everything was clear, and people understood their background culture. Even they are from different religion, but the Islamic culture was overarching culture for many. We have seen scholars who are Jews, who are Christian, who are even believing in stars and other things, have been contributing to the Islamic civilization. And it continued for a very long time. And all of them consider the Islamic culture is their culture. So we need to resolve identity crisis that many countries are facing after the colonial time. And this, if we don't resolve it, then we cannot move forward. Many countries in the Muslim world are trying to move forward. And unfortunately, many countries also have tried to import identity what I call it importing identity. So instead of using the tradition, they start from an imported identity. And unfortunately, many of these examples have failed. And not only failed, but it cost the country efforts, political instabilities, and also money and many resources and other things. So like the famous quote saying, whoever doesn't have a history will not have a future. So we need to look into this carefully. And only the rediscovering our spiritual traditions and trying to put it into a modern context will resolve the identity crisis that many people are facing. This is on the spiritual dimension. On the intellectual dimension, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, that one of the big problems that happened when the colonial power came in most of the Muslim countries, they said, okay, what you have is very old, very archaic, and then you just throw it away. We are trying to give you a new view for life, a new view for progress. Definitely, nobody can ignore that the Western civilization in the modern times have contributed a lot to the humanity. Nobody can ignore this idea. But also nobody can ignore that the Western civilization is built on previous civilization contributions. So it's not a kind of an abrupt change in history. It's a continuation, an accumulation of traditions, And definitely for the Western civilization, they start from their own tradition. So when Europe during the Renaissance trying to recover from the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages time, they looked into their own tradition and they start to renew it, criticize it, and build on it. And they used also other civilizations' foundation. So that's why when people talk about Western civilization, people describe it as Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian. Why? Because this is the foundation. This is the foundation for this part of the world. This is the foundation. So for us, the problem is during the colonial era, the intellectual traditions of Muslims have been continuously going on, but suddenly, and due to this colonial era, have been a big disruption. We can see this in many things. We can see this in many things. For example, the issue of philosophy. Muslims have been contributing to philosophy and made a big progress in this direction. And they were not only counting on the Greek philosophy, but we know many of the scholars like Ibn Sina and others, they talked about, for the first time in history, in fact, they talked about the tradition of the Eastern traditions and the Eastern philosophy. And they tried to make a synthesis to bring up a kind of a new stream in this intellectual tradition, which will fit into the Islamic worldview, and at the same time using all the intellectual experiences of the previous civilization. So this type of activities have been stopped abruptly due to the colonial era. So we need to rediscover this again. We need to go back and try to root our intellectual endeavors for the future based on our tradition. So exactly like the Renaissance in Europe, people rediscovered the Greco-Roman and the Judeo-Christian backgrounds. So we need to rediscover also our intellectual and spiritual background and try to rebuild what we have lost, and we try to build on it for the future. Again, this doesn't mean that we need to look critically at whatever we inherited from the intellectual traditions. Some of these traditions might not fit to the modern age. So we need to look into it carefully, and we need to see what can fit and what might not be fitting into the modern context or outdated or anything like this. So this is how we make the synthesis to bring up a new intellectual tradition that will fit our culture and will fit our identity and will push forward our countries to the future. There is a very interesting phenomena taking place. I'm not sure if some of you are following the discussion worldwide now on this issue, especially it was aggravated by COVID-19. People now talking about deglobalization. So the trend in the world now is deglobalization. Globalization as an era, almost many people now accept the fact that globalization ended already. Globalization ended already. And COVID-19 accelerated this ending of globalization. Now we are talking about deglobalization. Deglobalization means we will have a more pluralistic world, that each part of it will celebrate its own tradition, whether spiritual, intellectual, even political tradition. And these traditions will come back again to be a kind of to be exchanged among the human beings at the broad spectrum. So people in the West will learn from Asia, people in Asia will learn from the Middle East and their tradition, and the people in Africa will also learn from the West and Asia, Middle East. So it will be a kind of an interactive type of intellectual and spiritual activities. So I think because of this deglobalization movement that's taking place now, this is a time for especially the Muslim world in general, and each country in the Muslim world, because each country also have their own nice tradition, to create their own brand. They create their own brand, if I can call it like this, a brand of intellectual tradition and spiritual tradition that based on their history and will represent their own identity in a very clear way. This is the points that I wanted actually to share with all of you, because the time, of course, will not permit, but definitely we can discuss many of these points, because this is not simply can be done simply, but it will need a lot of efforts and a lot of work, and also a deep understanding in our intellectual and spiritual tradition that can be put it into a modern context and make our future brighter, inshallah, and also will help us to contribute to the world at something which is original, not copying others. We'll just contribute something which is original, indigenous, and fruitful, that kept our societies sustainable for a long time, and it can keep it sustainable for also a long time in the future. Thank you very much for listening. This is just a few reflections. I hope I am to some extent on time.
Yeah, Jazakumullah khair, Professor Walid. Very interesting. You have put up the challenges. Very interesting. I'll just summarize a little bit here. You talked about the disruptions which have taken place, and you reminded me of a famous book titled Destiny Disrupted by Tamim Ansari. It is a nice reading, and you talked about the challenges which have been left, internal, external challenges, and the internal challenges, especially the challenges of tribal identity, tribalism, religious differences, and we need to enter into the era of decolonization. And this decolonization has a price, and it has important prizes like spiritual independence. Muslims have to maintain their spiritual independence. And the Islamic history, Islamic civilization history has always been inclusive. When you talked about the Arab orthodoxy, it reminded me of one professor, Arab Christian professor, who said to me that the Muslims have interacted with the Arab Orthodox Christianity and not with the West as much as it is being said is being portrayed today. And Muslim societies, even here in Asia, were always inclusive of Buddhism, Hinduism, and other religions. And we have to overcome our identity crisis, which came with an imported educational model and economic crisis. And you ended up on a very important point by saying that we need deglobalization. Actually, I talk to students. I tell the students we are in the era of Pepsi Cola globalization. So I liked your term, which you used, deglobalization, and you're right that the pandemic and the climate crisis, which we are seeing every day on the news, is a challenge for the young generation, and it is a challenge of how to maintain and sustain and develop our Merdeka or our Hurriya and our state of Insan al-Kamil or Insan Sejahtera. Thank you very much, Professor Wali. Jazakumullah khair. Our next speaker this morning is the director of IMU, or International Institute of Muslim Unity, Professor Dr. Dawood Abdul Malik Yahya Al-Laylawi. He's also professor of education at Kulliyah of Education, and his topic is Islam, Insan Management, and Islamic Perspective. Professor Dawood, the microphone is yours. Welcome.
Thanks, Prof. Imtiaz, and my greetings to Prof. Abdul Aziz, Prof. Uthman, and all the brothers and sisters who attended this event. Without any further delay, I will be discussing, maybe in line with what was said earlier. We would like to free the mind, the heart, and our behavior from the Western thought, conceptualization, and also actions, particularly in one specific area, that is the process of how to deal with human beings and how to manage them. And also, are we, or to what extent we are free and independent in thoughts and in action in relation to treating human beings and managing human beings, particularly in our own organization. You know, in the West, they have used, we have come to today to use the word HR, human resources, but also they've been using manpower, staff, talent, forces, human capital, workforce, workers, employees, and so on. But all of these names, they have their own connotation, and they are based on the leadership style, the philosophy, or even the organizational culture of any particular organization. However, the word we are using at the moment in the Muslim countries is human resources, but we deal with human resources like financial and material assets. So it's an economic and materialistic concept. So should we become free and independent from using this kind of false connotation, which does not reflect the holistic view of human beings? Insan consists, we say, the body, the mind, and the soul. But this concept, human resources, is money, materialistic. So the nature of human beings, also their needs and value, determines how people should be treated and managed. At the moment, there are three in the West. I'm talking about in the West. There are three conceptualization for treating people and managing people: the commodity one, the machine one, and the humanistic one. We know that the commodity and the machine is based on money. So you sell and buy, or you fit somebody to the salary and so on. But even the humanistic concept of today, they think that human beings' problems are solved by rational thinking and reasoning, and they reject the idea of revealed knowledge. So only the mind is the only source to solve human beings' problems. Okay, let me just quote a study which was conducted in China recently. It was about human resources management philosophy and people's attitude and performance. It's a case study. There were two factories, have similar structure. They are producing the same products. They have around 3,000 workforce, but they have different philosophy or culture of management. Now, the only difference, they were completely similar. They were manufacturing and exporting from China to the rest of the world. The only difference was one of them followed the American philosophy of management and the other one followed the Chinese management philosophy. And they found that the first one is part of an American company, of course. Now, the result were the American one has negative impact, whereas the Chinese has positive impact on the attitudes as well as performance. Now, let us ask ourselves, how do we manage our own people? What is the productivity of our own people and institutions and organizations? So are we free? Did we liberate our mind and heart and action? Allah has created everything for human beings to serve insan. And he was given the potentials, the mind, the senses, everything to be creative and innovative and develop their life and succeed in both lives, in the hereafter and in this life. They were given the freedom to make decisions, but do we really feel free to make the right decision on the basis of our culture and thought and worldview? The concept of insan as such has several dimensions from an Islamic point of view: cognitive or reasoning, emotional, social, ethical, practical. So human beings, insan, should be treated and managed on the basis of these dimensions. And also our needs will be reflecting such kind of dimension. So our leaders and managers and the way we treat each other should be dealt with accordingly. Now, how we deal with people as material or spiritual or a holistic personality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us as leaders. We have the ability to think, reason, learn, develop, change, transform, and also have impact in the environment we have, and responsible and accountable, because Allah has given us this trust or amana from our body to our world to our life to all the creatures around us. But at the same time, as we know that we have our own weaknesses as part of our nature, such as being in a hurry, pessimism, weakness, stinginess, jealousy, unsatisfaction, forgetfulness, following our lust and desire at the expense of others, tend to argue, do injustice, ignorance, thinking of being eternal, easy to be misled, and others, as stated in the Quran and Sunnah. Now, when we deal with people, are we taking into account all these things and weaknesses or not? From my own experience for the last 40 years of management, I can see quite the opposite. Although we are claiming that we are adopting Islamic paradigm, I think we are still colonized in terms of thinking and in terms even of behavior. Just to give you a name, the name of the insan and the root of the word from uns. Uns, you feel happy when you are socializing yourself with whom you love. To what extent our management creates such kind of environment, which you feel close to your brothers. You work effectively with other teams. Now we have to move from philosophy to action, to offices, to classroom, to neighborhood, to wherever we live in. some of the implication for such kind of concept in Islam, you know, we have a whole surah called Insan, Surah Al-Insan. Organization have to put special position in their organization chart. For instance, now, if you look at human resources, what they call human resources, just put equivalent to finance and marketing. Whereas we believe Insan is dignified, and we feel that he's the Khalifa of Allah, and we put it equal to finance and marketing and other positions. So even our structure within each organization does not reflect the civilized word of Insan. We have to move from philosophy, from theory into practice, so that we can manifest such kind of real concept in our life, in our daily life. Insan is honored, was honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and dignified. So it should not be equated with others. Also, we have to deal with people as dignified and leaders, not as commodities and machines. We have to adopt the continuous learning, the personality transformation, because this is tazkiyah. Tazkiyah in terms of professionalism, that is the mind, the heart, the organs. When we talk about tazkiyah, we don't mean tazkiyah only dhikr and recitation of Quran. We are talking about total holistic transformation of people. To what extent our organization, our societies are trying, endeavoring to transform, holistic transformation, and what kind of program we are adopting, and to what extent we are successful in doing so. We don't want to be unique in terms of theory only, but we have to be unique, a leading example in life. Iman, amal salih, always in the Quran is connected. So you have to have sound belief, sound emotion, and sound action. What we are lacking nowadays is actions, practices. We have to have this conducive environment, Islamic environment, so that we can work closely as Insan. So we can reflect the true meaning of Insan in the way we are interacting with each other. Also, leadership, whether we like it or not, their culture, their style of, and their philosophy affect the way we live within our organizations. So they have to be leading examples in professionality, integrity, ethic, decision, and so on. Then we can claim that we are liberal. We are liberating our mind, heart, and action and practices. All stakeholders should be committed to such kind of conceptualization in theory and practice, in terms of knowledge and in terms of practices. Also, if Insan feel happy to be socializing himself or herself, we have to create collaboration and collaborative team. We cannot achieve higher goals unless we have effective team, harmonious work. And we have to introduce this or cultivate the self-criticism, the intrinsic motivation, because we have Iman. Our Iman is directing us towards self-check. And do we cultivate such kind of environment and also transfer our own staff and others and the community along those lines? So we have to help ourselves that we are directing ourselves towards what Allah has created us for. And that's repeated always: holistic, balanced, integrated. But to what extent we are translating such kind of insan conceptualization in our decision-making process from the top to the bottom? All leaders, managers, head of departments, offices, and so on should be cultivating such culture, the culture of insan, and its manifestation in our daily life. So in a way, each organization considers itself as a family, working as a family, and also relating itself towards impacting and benefiting the society and humanity.
Dr. Dawood, 2 minutes.
Okay. So it is, Muslim organization is insan and society-centered organizations. I hope that I will finish with this model of Muslim organization and insan management model from the beginning of recruitment, which you have to cultivate in terms of education and training and socialization, a holistic person. Then we have also to take care of the human beings in the organization, the insan, and also his or her own family well-being, then the impact on the organization as well as the community and humanity. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much, Professor Dawood. Thank you very much for your presentation. You have touched a very important topic here by talking that we should not be thinking of human resource development only in financial and management concepts which are coming from the West. We have to free our mind, and the importance of being a responsible Khalifa or a trustworthy human being on the earth, which is mentioned in the Quran. And we have to think of insan, development of human being or insan, in a positive and not a negative manner. And that requires the importance of human dignity. And human dignity does not have to be mechanical. You talked about tazkiyah as not only being tazkiyah of in terms of zikr, but in a holistic manner. Excuse me. Yeah, but a transformative manner. And this requires doing good deeds, good amal. And when you talk about amal and inclusive society, it reminded me of the verse of the Quran, which talks about fastabiqul khairat. We don't compete with others because my religion is better than others, but compete to do good with each other. And you ended up by talking about holistic human being and holistic management, since you are engaged in organizational management. And this holistic management has to have implications for the whole status and the personality of the person at a personal level and also at in the social level. Thank you very much, Professor Dawood. Now we go to the last speaker of our day, which is no other than Professor Abdul Aziz Bargut, who is the Dean of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. And I have to say this always, I'm always surprised to see that he has 2 PhDs, mashallah. PhD in Islamic Civilization and History from University of Malaya and PhD in Education from IIUM. He is the former, he is attached with the International Islamic University for a long time. And I've been hearing his name since I'm here only for 2 years, but he has his name for a long time and from many people whom I met when I was in Thailand. He has published 11 books and several articles, and he was the former Deputy Director of Internationalization and Industry and Community Relations of IIUM from 2011 to 2018 and served as the chair of ISTAC, Sheikh al-Kulliya of ISTAC, and the Dean of Cooperative Strategy and Quality Assurance. He sits on several international bodies as an advisor and as an advisor of both Muslim and non-Muslim organizations. And he has received several awards, such as Ajman Award for Excellence, Award for Dedicated Leadership and Services, at IIUM Maulid Rasul Award, Maidan Academy Award, the Jewel of Muslim World OIC Today 2019, and the Murabbi Award from Kulliya of IRKHS. So welcome, Professor Abdulaziz. The microphone is yours.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. First of all, let me welcome all our viewers and speakers and participants in today's very important webinar. I would like also to thank Professor Osman, Prof. Walid, and Prof. Dawood for the very important points raised, actually, which paved the way for deeper understanding of today's topic. I would like also to thank Prof. Imtiaz. Dr. Imtiaz has, in fact, put us in a very important framework to discuss an issue like this one. Today, we are talking about Insan Sejahtera and Merdeka, and independence and the freedom of a nation or people. And there are three important points there. You liberate the mind's soul and maintain the development. I think these three statements, as Professor Osman mentioned in the beginning, summarize the gist of this topic today. However, what I'm going to do, I'm just will take this time to raise some questions and put some observations about this topic, not only about the case of the independence of Malaysia, Merdeka in Malaysia here, but in the Islamic world in general. As I think Prof. Walid mentioned, like usually, or Dr. Imtiaz also mentioned, we look at Malaysia as one of the Muslim countries which come a long way in this idea or in this process of independence. I see independence is not only the day where we took our independence. It's not the day where we received that freedom and our land was freed and the colonizer goes back to his home. But I look at Merdeka, I look at independence and hurriya of a people, of a nation, especially in the Islamic world, as a process, as a continuous process of liberating the minds, the hearts, the people, and also developing the nation, and also trying to reach the potential, unleash the potential of a nation to build itself, to build and to regain back the retardation, the problems caused by colonization. There are certain type of colonization, like the colonization in North Africa, for example, in Algeria and Morocco and others. The colonization was not just decorative, but it was deep into the culture, into the mind, into the people, into the heritage. So the idea of independence, I see it like trying to find our way to achieve full potential of our humanity, of our human capacities, capabilities, abilities, and put it in building our own present, our own future. But when we build our own present and future, we build it based on our worldview, our heritage, our culture, not the worldview or the culture or the tradition or the heritage of the colonizer. So I always see in this process of decolonization that there is something deeper than just the buildings or the economic side of it, the technological side of it, the progress side of it. But there is the side, if I want to use the metaphor of the iceberg, you see outside or at the top, you see the progress, the economic numbers, you see the institutions, you see the routes, you see technology, but not necessarily when you see these things, you have independence or you have liberated your mind and soul and heart. This only happens when you liberate your culture, when you become leaving your own worldview, your own culture, your own heritage, your own self, and based on that, you build your society, you build your community. This is why you find some of the countries which were colonized and they took their independence until today, you will find that they still have not built their own people, their own culture, their own way of life, their own style of life. You find that the colonial or the practices of others are actually manifested and become part and parcel of our own culture. And that's why I say there is a need to look at the deeper side of it, the mind, the culture, the heritage, the value system. Are we leaving our own value system or not? Whenever there is an independence of any Muslim country, I always remember the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was thrown out of Mecca, of his place, by the Quraysh, and then he went for 23 years and came back in the conquest of Mecca. The conquest of Mecca, when he came back with a different worldview, with a different type of people, with a different type of personalities and companion of Rasulullah. And he came to Mecca and say to the people of Mecca, go, you are free. اذهبوا فأنتم الطلقاء. You go, you are free. We are not going to punish you, or we are not going to kill you like what the colonizer does in many cases. But the Prophet say, اذهبوا, go, you are free. Why? Because the mission and the vision of the Prophet Muhammad, the mission and vision of the Islamic worldview is the mission of i'mar, istikhlaf, the mission of building nations, the mission of building life, building good life, hayatun tayyibah. That's why the worldview of Islam subject us to a specific understanding of life, which is umran, which is i'mar. So to us, liberating or getting independence is immediately starting in a process of umran or i'mar, as Ibn Khaldun says. And when we look at umran and i'mar from this perspective of the colonizer and colonization, it becomes a must for us who were colonized to develop ourselves, to build ourselves, to regain back our civilization and our life. So to me, liberation, independence starts when we regain back our originality. We regain back our sense of intellectualism, of spirituality, sense of being Khalifatullah, sense of being the owners of this land, and we are instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do that i'mar. So unleashing the potential of people, helping the people to put all their potentials and build their life which they want, not what the colonizer wanted to extend in our own independent lands. That is very important to understand the relation between the colonizer and the colonized. That's why if I wanted to mention one of the ideas of Malik bin Nabi at that time, long time ago, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, he coined the concept of colonization and colonializability. We are colonized because we are colonizable, because we have lost our worldview, our culture, our heritage, and we become subject to a different approach, to a different occupier who impose on us this. So regaining freedom, regaining independence means removing the germs, removing the remnant of colonializability. And that's why I like the, let's say if I take, because we're talking here about Merdeka and Malaysia, I like here, for example, one of the things is the Malaysian people here, particularly the Malay people, they, in general, they like their culture, they like their heritage, they like their values, and that's one precondition for independence. And they like this indigenous ideas, views, creative inventions that they can do by themselves. They can do, and even if they borrow something, they try to adapt it to the culture. And that's one thing that we need to advance and enhance and strengthen through education, culture, parenting, because family is very important in enhancing this sense of liberation and independence. Is crucial to enhance the role of family, as I said, brothers and sisters. So independence is a kind of a complex phenomenon which needs us to understand our worldview, understand our identity, understand our culture, and understand our model and vision of our own life, and also understand the world, understand others, because we are living with others. So we build our own society, our own civilization based on our worldview and culture, but in interaction with others, with other civilization. Islam, as Dr. Imtiaz mentioned, is a very inclusive civilization and worldview. We are not here to isolate ourselves from this. In order to do all this, brothers and sisters, it is very important that we see Merdeka and independence as an effort of a nation, not the government, not this group or that group, not this movement or that, but it's a nation, the whole ummah, the whole nation, the whole, that's what we call the collective resolve, the collective independence, so that we all free our minds, we all free our soul, we all adapt our culture and heritage, we all build our society and community. We all help one another. That's why education for independence is very important. Culture for independence is very important. Family knowledge and family environment for independence is important, especially when the trends of colonization, the trends of globalization, the trends of postmodernism, the trends of all this materialistic civilization are intensifying in terms of disrupting, not only disrupting, but destructive processes of cultures, of values, the value systems of nations. That's why, brothers and sisters, To end, it is very important to enhance the role of family, the role of education, the role of all religious institutions, cultural institutions in this drive to enhance and advance our continuous and sustained independence, which need to be manifested in building strong societies, strong civilizations, strong economies, so that we will not be always subject to the colonizer dictation. Whenever we are weak economically or socially or scientifically or technologically, we will be subject to the, as Ibn Khaldun says in the Muqaddimah, al-maghloobu da'iman mula'un bitaqlid al-ghalib. Those who are defeated, they are always subjected to the dictation of the oppressor or the colonizer. That's why we need to gain our real dependence by gaining our own creativity, originality to produce our own technology, our own science, our own solutions, our own knowledge that can help us build our societies. Brothers and sisters, that's why the last thing to say here, the role of our heroes, the role of our role models in our struggle for independence, the role of these scholars, ulama, mujahid. These are the role models that need to be kept always as our inspirers. This is very important. Not only the heroes who spoke about, who fight for it, but the ulama are heroes, the scholars are heroes, and so on and so forth. So brothers and sisters, as I said, knowledge, culture, and values are important to regain and to continue our independence. So to end, we are, after we finish the jihad al-asghar, the small jihad of gaining our independence, we are today in the great jihad, the grand jihad. Malaysia has now 64 years in this great jihad, and the way is very long in this great jihad, the jihad of ilm, of tarbiyah, of science, of technology, of economy, of becoming the people who lead our own life and economies. With this, I thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Abdulaziz, for a very rich presentation. And you raised the topic about decolonization, breaking the link between the colonizer and the colonized, referring to Malik bin Nabi. So how we can attain our full humanity, build future based on our heritage, our worldview, our originality. And you mentioned also how Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after entering to Makkah, he gave the freedom, not just physical freedom, but freedom to build Umran, to build the Umran and Ummah of the civilization of Medina, of Yathrib, which was very inclusive. And you talked about the importance of the independence of development. Development does not mean only structural building development, but development of the full human being, not just a building of the people and originality. So now we have about 30 minutes for question and answer. There are several questions in the chat box. And the first one, I think it is directed to Professor Osman. And I'll take it that one. This is from Dr. Noor Zalifa from Kuliya of Education. She's asking the question, how do we enhance effectively the concept of unity in diversity by showing the beautiful face of Islam without encroaching and enforcing on the others, so that we can come over the implications of colonizations and make Merdeka, that is independence, indigenous to the people of Malaysia, to the Malaysians, and feel responsible, that we are irresponsibly encroaching on jungles and natural environments, and we are not, which are very important concern now. What will be your recommendation for the improvement and enhancement of our unity in diversity and Sejahtera Insan?
Thank you for the question. It is important to realize that unity appears before diversity as truth, as principles. It's not that diversity comes first, then only you have unity. In the way, for example, let's say the history of creation, because God, Allah Ta'ala, displays diversity in His creation. Just look at the world of nature, the natural world, how diverse in terms of species and indigenous, all right, in terms of creatures, all kinds. So we can observe diversity. Now, of course, the word used now is biodiversity. Yeah? But it's not just biodiversity, but everything. So we can observe diversity in creation, the world of nature. But that diversity is a manifestation of unity. We start, the very principle is Allah is one. Allah is one. Allah is unity. Although Allah has many different names and qualities, but there is unity. Now, this unity manifests in diversity in the world of creation, but underlying that diversity is unity. So the unity of Allah Ta'ala may be extended to the unity of creation. In other words, when Allah created the universe, the unity that is the essence of Allah Ta'ala did not disappear from creation, but rather underlies that creation. And this is what we say, unity in diversity. Now we come to the human world, the human order. That's what we see. Starting from one original couple, Adam alayhi salam and his wife, Hawa. Then we have now the humankind, the human family, displaying diversity of ethnicity, cultures, and so on. But there is the underlying unity. So the message for us is that we must emphasize the principle of unity. This, we need to show in what way that there is unity. So, for example, let's take the case of, for example, people of different religions and so on. In other words, there is religious diversity, ethnic diversity. Now, for those who study the phenomena of diversity, can observe commonalities. We look for things that are common to the different species. There's something that unites. So in other words, if you want to bring about unity of diverse human groups, say diverse religious group, we must look for what are common to all these different groups. So in other words, reality displays both diversity and unity and diversity. But if we just tell our students or in schools and so on, we only demonstrate diversity, but no principle of unity, then we are not going anywhere, right? So as far as Islam is concerned, Islam has the necessary principles, the ideas, the teaching that can integrate, unify a diversity. Of course, we have to refer to the Quran. The Quran contains those principles in the forms of values, in the forms of principles that are universal in nature. And it is this body of universal principles, the universal teachings and ideas that enable us to unite not just the Muslims, but to unite humanity. We believe that Islam has given by Allah Ta'ala as the last message to humanity. Allah Ta'ala has given to Islam the means how to integrate diversity, and but the details have to be worked out, and this depends on our scholars in different fields. That's my answer to that question.
Thank you very much, Professor Osman Baka. The next question is directed, I think, to Professor Abdulaziz Barghouth, and I'd like to ask him to reply to this. The question is how students can have a liberation of mind and independence while IIUM and ISTEC is practicing medical apartheid. I think it's referring to the vaccination issue. Why discriminate one party against another? Professor Barghouth, can you answer this, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Imtiaz. I think I already talked to our Deputy Dean student, Dr. Nick, and we will be having discussions with our postgraduate student the next week, inshallah, on these issues. And I think we discuss it in that forum. And we deliberate, inshallah, together on this issue. There is no problem, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much for putting it right and saying that there's another proper forum for this to be discussed and not this forum, because here the topic is something else. There's a question from Rumaiza to everyone. Should the Muslim spiritual and intellectual tradition be addressed in line with nation or ethnicity and tradition? Is there any trend that we are moving towards post-pandemic? Anyone would like to answer? Dr. Dawood or Dr. Faris?
Faris, it is related to Faris.
Dr. Faris, Dr. Walid.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Actually, the question is, I don't know if I understand the question properly, but the thing is, the spiritual identity, in fact, doesn't relate to ethnic groups. Spiritual tradition is not related to ethnic groups. We cannot say that Indians have their own spiritual tradition, Chinese have their own spiritual tradition. Spiritual traditions in general used to be attached to religious practices. So, and it cuts across. So for example, the Sufi tradition is a tradition that will cut across different ethnic groups as long as they are Muslims. So they are practicing it, that's part of their identity. And we can, for example, Naqshbandi Tariqa, we find Naqshbandi who is Chinese and Indian and Arab and even Western and other things. So basically, we need to identify the spiritual heritage is attached to a kind of religious practices. But at the same time, as I mentioned in my short intervention, is there is a similarity in the spiritual traditions, especially in the East, because of the long coexistence between different religions. So we will find practices that are quite similar in the Sufi tradition, in the mystical tradition of the Orthodox Christian, in the Judeo tradition as well, Kabbalah, and we will find it also in Buddhism and Hinduism. And I think this is a kind of the interaction, we represent the interaction between all these religions which coexist in the same area. So rediscovering the tradition will help us actually to find a common ground, because at the end of the day, the spiritual tradition is looking to connect the human being with the supreme power, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, we might differ in few things here and there, but all religions actually, the main goal of it is to connect the human being to God, the supreme power. So I don't think there is an issue of having the spiritual tradition that can split people or anything like this. But in fact, it can put people together. And there's a lot of details about some of the great scholars in the history of Islam. One of them is, his name is Abu Bakr al-Mawsili, for example. He used to have a kind of lessons for tafsir al-Quran, interpretation of the Quran. And also he had a kind of an open lesson to the interpretation of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And his interpretation was attended by many of the Christian and Jews in his time. So there is the akhlaq part, the behavioral part is actually common. Yes, in Aqidah we have differences, definitely. This is quite known. But in the spiritual tradition, the way to God, I think there's a lot of commonality that we need to build upon it. But never the spiritual tradition was connected to races. Never. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To Professor Usman Bakar again, how can we build epistemology of humanity which is comprehensive and address the metaphysical problems of nationhood in practical way?
Well, the question won't be answered in a satisfactory manner. You just go straight to practicality, right? Because of course, where do we go in order to answer the question? We have to go to that branch of knowledge called epistemology, theory of knowledge. But epistemology has both theoretical and applied dimension. So I know the question asking for practicality, then we have to go to we go to the practical dimension of epistemology. Yes, I mean, for example, the issue of ethics of knowledge, right? So ethics of knowledge deals with what ought, what should not be. Basically, for example, of course, the ethics of knowledge applies to the acquisition of knowledge, applies to the problem of dissemination of knowledge, applies to application of knowledge. So in Islam, there is a body of teaching based on the Quran, on the Hadith. In other words, there are many kinds of knowledge. We should distinguish between the freedom to pursue knowledge and the freedom to apply the knowledge to different types. So, of course, we are guided by the principle coming from the Prophet ﷺ that we seek the protection from useless knowledge. Yeah. In other words, we seek knowledge in God from knowledge which is not useful, which does not benefit us. So it's not that the knowledge is not true, but the knowledge is not useful. But who is going to determine what is useful and not useful? It is the community, the Ummah. In other words, leaders of the Muslim community, whether they are political leaders, especially religious leaders, they should have that sense priority. In other words, they should be able to have that kind of perception, understanding. What are the top priorities for the Ummah? The problem we have there right now is that we don't determine our priorities. We follow the priorities established by the West, right? They decide what is good for us, what is best for us, not us ourselves. Well, this has been precisely what the panel has been talking just now. In other words, to be independent, to be really independent, to have the intellectual freedom, especially in the field of education, in the field of science and technology, we decide what are the things that we want to give priority in our studies, in our research, in our application. That is important. Of course, in practice, it's not being practiced. So the question, of course, can be answered in very, very broad way. So I just point one example in the practical way, because you insist on the how to apply at the practical level.
Okay, thank you. Professor Dawood, this is a question for you from Malik Ilyas. How do you imagine schools at the secondary level going to go about cultivating Insani practices?
Is a very important and good question. because it goes straight away to translating knowledge into action. To me, with my humble knowledge, I would advise with the following. Number one is that school management staff and teachers should be leading example for Insan practices. They should be committed to the concept of Insan practices in its holistic sense, as I said, with the different components of personality. That's number one. So Qudwa is number one. Otherwise, they will preach without practice. It is counterproductive. Number two, they should have clear understanding of what they want to achieve in this secondary school. Again, stating all the different dimensions. So we have to have clear objective or learning outcomes related to every component of personality, and then trying to apply and implement such kind of things in, with tarbiyah and tazkiyah. So we want to have a comprehensive tarbiyah and tazkiyah. By doing so, then we have to have regular check, evaluation to the impact of what we are doing in our school. That's what I would advise to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Again to Professor Osman, this is about a question about multiracial state in Malaysia. How can, when we talk about heritage and tradition, does it mean going back to Malay tradition? What is the best way to unite a nation that has different races and traditions so that we can be fair to all races and religions equally or respectively?
Well, I think on the as far as the situation in Malaysia is concerned, the Malays as the natives of the country, as the largest ethnic group, whose region is the official region of the country, and so on. Yes, the Malays are not perfect, but then I think the Malays have achieved many things. Also, they have shown, in other words, their treatment of people of the ethnic groups in the past history have also having many positive things. All right. So, of course, as we have developed, as we have progressed, we feel that we are not satisfied. In other words, we could do more. Right. So the sense of dissatisfaction comes from both sides, come from the non-Malays and also from the Malays, many of the Malays. But the point is related to the same question that one of our sisters asked, is about the question of unity and diversity. Now, what the Malays need to achieve is that they realize a much more improvement in their understanding of Islam. If people ask me today, all right, what do you say about the about the Malays and Islam? I said there are certain dimensions of the teachings of Islam that are not given a top priority. There's a sense of a kind of marginalized by the Malays, because in the past the Malays concentrate on certain aspects of Islam, because when Islam came to the region, it came through Islam that has been interpreted by the ulama, right? Because the Malays did not adopt Islam based on their study, their direct access to the Quran. No, it is in Islam that has already been consists of different mazahib, different schools of thought, and happens one particular school of thought, the Asharite school, is dominant in the Malay world, and therefore the Malays in general tend to look at the understanding of Islam through the prism of the Asharite school of thought, and in the legal school of thought is through the Shafi'i school of thought. All right. the great majority of the Malays stick to that. But I think it's a matter of time as the Malays become more exposed to the world, more interactive. Yeah, I'm sure the Malays who study at IIUM will experience it different way because they encounter daily with Muslims of different mazhab, not just the Shafi'i, the Ash'ari. So this question of progress. But the point is, all right, Islam does provide the guidance, the principles by which they should treat the other races. So I think precisely because they believe that Islam as a last religion comprehends the teachings of the other religion. Personally, I would say that we should look for commonalities. In other words, there are many good moral values also being observed in the other religion. So when Malays and the other groups, the Malaysians in general, want to use a region as a means of unifying the people or solving problems of society, well, one way is to gather, to collect all our commonalities. And the best way to do that is through dialogue. Through dialogue. That's why I believe, and I'm sure Professor Imtiaz, we believe dialogue is a very good way of solving this problem. Through dialogue, we are able to identify what unify us, what are common to us. And communities are not static. It's not static. They grow. In other words, through more understanding, more content, the elements of commonalities keep on increasing. So what we know as communities at one time may be different later on when we study more about the other. To know the others is a way also of trying to solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question to Professor Walid. Professor Walid, this is from Shiroz Khan. His question is to Professor Walid. Would you agree that World War II has demolished the Muslim Khilafah for the sake of gaining identities of nations, and that our struggle against IDs spilled into abolishing the Muslim dominance in the field of education and producing reasons for the creation of Israel?
I think there's a lot of good studies currently that basically talking about the creation of a new world order. And there is a very interesting book, I think the name of the book is The Game of Nations, and talking about this issue. So everybody knows now that the colonial era wouldn't take its width and breadth without trying to make the Khilafah collapse, the Ottoman Khilafah collapse. And after this, all the countries which were under the Ottomans are distributed among the other empires. So this one is quite, I don't think anybody can argue against this fact now. It's written by the Westerners and written by everybody. So it's a kind of a public secret, like people say. So everybody knows this one now. And the Khilafah was a kind of a main barrier for the expansion of the other empires. And this is why everybody worked to make it collapse. Definitely there was internal problems also in the Ottoman at this time. Nobody can ignore this. But it was a barrier in front of other empires. So definitely agree. Yeah, definitely agree.
Thank you. Dr. Noor Zalifa wants to just share with us that IIUM has a flagship initiative of building a jungle school for the Orang Asli people in Malaysia. So this is just a comment. And the next one is a question again about nationalism. How anyone can answer this? How nationalism is aligned with Maqasid al-Sharia? Is it against the Ummah to establish nationalism in different Muslim countries? Means we divide the Muslims among as Turks, as Arabs, as different races. So how is the relation between nationalism and Maqasid al-Sharia? Professor Abdulaziz, I give this to you.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. I think most of the questions are like interrelated. Like for this question, we have to look at the Islamic worldview. What is the core of the Islamic worldview? What Islam says about nationalism, what Islam says about other religions, what Islam says about other people, what Islam says about many things. When we look at the real core of the teachings of Islam, we will understand that Islam is a very inclusive religion, is a very inclusive civilization, which respects others. Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in many hadith, he categorically explained that there is no farq, لا فرق بين عربي وأعجمي إلا بالتقوى. There is no difference between an Arab or a non-Arab except with piety or taqwa. Even the Quran itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have created you from a single pair of male and female and made you into nations and tribes. You may know one another. The most honored of you, the most respected of you in the sight of God is the pious one, is the amal. In Islam, things are very clear. In the Islamic worldview, things of the dignity of man, things of the equality, justice, things of tolerance, things of respecting others are all clear, not only at the text level, the worldview, but at the real practical model of the Prophet. If you take the Constitution of Medina, which was established by the Prophet Muhammad, there is a rule of law there. There is a respect of the non-Muslim. There is a respect of everybody. You see the Islamic civilization in Spain or Cordoba or Samarkand, or you will find all this. The point here is that the Maqasid Sharia is not against all these kind of things. In fact, Rasulullah was from a tribe, which is Quraysh. He was from Arab, from Mecca. But Islam told him that your job is not to be a Rasul for the Arabs or to do this job with the Arabs. So it is a universal mission. It is rahmatan lil alamin. It is for everybody. That's why, as Martin Luther said, Islam is color blind. These values are all there in the worldview. So nationalism is a very important human condition, which is part and parcel of the human nature itself. I am Arab, Algerian, someone is an African, this is all, the Sharia doesn't say anything against a person being born in this place or having this nationality or this or that. But Sharia stresses on the things that make or transform this nationalism into racism, rationalism into madhabism, nationalism into a kind of a different creature. So what the Islamic worldview does, or Sharia does, or Maqas Sharia does, regulate things to be in accordance with the religion of Islam, which is universal. Within this model, nationalism, it's okay, your language is okay, your color is okay, but you have a higher mission to do towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we are trying to do in this university, as an example, in IIUM, trying to just elevate people from this level, which is a human level, to other levels of being Khalifatullah, being Rahmatan lil Alameen. So when you move your mind, your heart, your understanding, your knowledge, your ilm, to this level, you will serve more your national interests, because Islam is not, again, does not, or Sharia does not come and say, please, in order to be a Muslim, leave your nationality, or leave your Arabism, or your Malay tradition or culture. No, it's in fact enhancing those things and putting them in a higher, deeper level of human action, human amal, so that like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Yes, he was in Mecca, he was an Arab, but he becomes rahmatan lil alamin. So I think we need to understand these teachings of the Islamic worldview, that they are trying to liberate us from this narrow nationalism, narrow madhabism, narrow, all type of narrow, to bring us to the great liberation of the Sharia. Imam Shatibi, the last thing to say, Imam Shatibi in his book الموافقات في أصول الشريعة says one of the مقاصد الشريعة, because there is مقاصد الشريعة, the 5 values, but there is something called the مقاصد المكلف, the مقاصد of the Khalifatullah. He says that the core مقاصد of Sharia is to liberate. Look at, he used this word, to liberate and free man from his own desires and grips, to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by his own choice, as he is a servant of Allah without his choice. When Allah created you as a man or woman, you don't have a choice, but your way of life, how you work, how you do, you have the choice to do this. So to summarize, Islamic worldview is full of these things. But what is the problem? The deficiency of the Islamic culture, of the Islamic personality, is the application side, is the implementation side, is showing the real teachings, like our sister Nur Zalifa when she mentioned about the Oran Asli jungle school for Oran Asli, and she is adopting the Islamic values, the Islamic akhlaq, the unity in diversity for Oran. That's the application. These are what is missing in the Islamic education. We teach a lot of big concepts, but to translate them into now a real solution, whether with a neighbor who is a non-Muslim or whether with a business person who is a then that's where we need to do more. Then people can see the virtue, the value, the practical value of the Islamic worldview and teachings.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdulaziz. With this, we are coming to the end of our webinar today. I'd like to thank all the participants who have joined us today. We are about 50 people, both here and on YouTube. And I also thank the distinguished panelists for the discussion. It was a very rich discussion, and I found that discussion was had a unity of subject and content, which was shared by all the speakers. So Jazakumullah khair, and let us end this webinar with the reading of Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal-Asr innal insana lafi khusr illa allazina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. May Allah bless you all. This is a great webinar. Thank you, Prof. Osman, Prof. Dawood,